Welcome to Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. A world where coming in second place is not an option, but where principle-centered winning is the only approach.
Good morning and welcome to Government Contracting Weekly. I'm Jim McCarthy, the owner of Key Solutions and the host of this show. It's not unusual that much of a government contractor's fate and future lies in the hands of a source evaluation board. And since the mission of Government Contracting Weekly is to help contractors win and retain contracts, as well as bridging the chasm between the private and the public sectors, we're going to devote all of today's show to a discussion of the inner workings of a typical source evaluation board. Our goal today is to provide you with a better understanding of how an SEB works, how it makes decisions, the whole process, as well as specific advice on how to give yourself the best chance at winning, coming away with a win. Joining me today to explore these and other questions are members of the NCMA Board of Directors and Advisors. First, we have Bill McNally, the Assistant Administrator for Procurement and Deputy Chief Acquisition Officer of NASA. Welcome back, Bill, to the show.
Thank you, Jim.
Glad you're here. And next, we want to meet Debra Scheider, the Director of the Office of Contracts for NRO. Good morning, Debra.
Good morning, Jim.
How you doing?
Thank you.
And then finally, we have Mitch Rose, the Director of Acquisition and Grants Office for NOAA. Good morning to you, Mitch.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Really glad that you're all here. Let's make this a really good show. As always, there's a lot to cover, so let's get right to it. So my first question, Bill, I'd like to ask you is, fundamentally, is there integrity in the selection process in the government?
Jim, I believe there is. I think some of the most important things, though, to maintain that integrity is communications. Before the RFP goes out, communicate with industry about the requirement, what process we're going to use to do the selection, and then make sure the RFP itself is clear, again, on the requirement, how we're going to do the selection. And then once we make the selection, when we do the debriefings, it's really critical that we tell the successful offer and the unsuccessful offer, you know, their major weaknesses, strengths, so that they understand how they did in the source selection process.
Okay. So then the question maybe arises, and maybe it's in part the chasm that I was talking about in the opening, but why is it that many members of the industry or the contracting community have some doubts that things aren't as smooth as you're saying? In other words, sometimes the winners say they win on merits and the losers say they lose on politics. So, Debra, my question for you is why would the industry have that perception, you think, at least parts of it?
Jim, the source selection process, as Bill outlined, is a very structured process. The criteria for award are outlined in the source selection plan and transmitted to industry. I think it's our goal, as Bill outlined, to communicate what the strengths, weaknesses, and merits of each proposal are to the successful and unsuccessful offers. So to the extent that we evaluate against the standards and communicate that to industry, I believe we are achieving good communication.
Okay. Mitch, question for you. In terms of outside influence, typically, does the source selection board come under, shall we say, some sort of pressure or influence from the outside? Is that ever permissible in any context?
We try to avoid that. We want to maintain a high level of integrity in the process. And to go back a little bit on the first question that you had, why is there perhaps a perception in industry that things aren't quite as fair and on the up and up as they ought to be? It's because of the point that Bill started to make, which is lack of communication in the front end of the process. Over the past decade or so, we've had a lessening of communication between government and industry, and we've made great pains to try and reverse that. Increasing the level of communication in the front end of the process is really going to stem that concern of industry.
Why do you suppose there's less communication now than there was in the past? I mean, what's causing that?
Lots of factors. Of course, the markets are much tighter now. There's a lot of concern about eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. People want to be careful. There's a lot of reasons that cause that, but what's really important is we've got to work very hard, especially in the front end of the acquisition cycle when requirements are being defined and validated, to bring industry in to communicate more, not less.
Okay.
So, Jim, the one thing I would add, if you're not in the room, you're concerned.
Yeah.
So industry isn't in the room during the evaluation process, and we really can't have them in the room. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why there is some concern.
What they don't know.
What they don't know.
Okay, let me ask you this question, maybe all of you, but we're all human, so we all have certain opinions and biases and preferences. Are they allowed to enter into a selection decision? In other words, when a source evaluation board member comes to the table, are they allowed to have a preconception about who they want or who they think ought to win or anything like that? How do you all deal with that? Any one of you?
Well, I would say that an easy analogy is our responsibility in maintaining the integrity of the process is to keep a level playing field. But the players that march out onto that field to compete for business, it's not our responsibility to equalize the players. So I would differentiate legitimate discriminatory advantage based on talent, experience, incumbency, prior experience in the same line of work. All of that would cause some differentiation among the offers. Our job is to keep a level playing field and get the best that we possibly can for the government client.
So, in other words, the evaluator doesn't have to come to the table like a blank sheet and has no knowledge of
Correct.
anything and then is persuaded by the evidence. But there are steps that are taken to make sure that those kinds of biases don't creep into the selection.
Evaluators are brought to the teams because they bring different backgrounds and expertise, and they're selected for the team for that purpose. Each evaluator independently reviews a proposal against the standards and identifies weaknesses and strengths. They completely review each proposal, and then they come together to form a consensus.
Let me ask you, Deb, is it career enhancing? Do people clamor to be on evaluation boards, or is it something that they try to avoid? What's your experience been?
My experience is that it's often another duty is assigned, and so depending on the environment that the office provides, it can be very career enhancing because it's a level of expertise that not everyone achieves.
Okay.
So, may I add,
Sure.
what we're trying to do at NASA is to make it career enhancing. So a lot of our management who assigns makes known that if you want to advance within the organization, you need to serve on a SEB or be ahead of an SEB.
Okay, I see. All right, well, we're going to step away for a little bit and take our first commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about what goes on beyond closed doors.
I'm Kevin Madden, the Vice President and General Manager of Honeywell's Federal Systems Group, with another government success story. In 2002, Honeywell started working with the GSA to reduce costs and provide a reliable source of energy at White Oak, the FDA's new headquarters. Today, White Oak can separate from the local electricity grid and sustain operations when there are outages, which they've done more than 70 times over the last 3 years. To make sure the FDA has the power to protect this critical research, even during Hurricane Sandy. Honeywell has helped more than 150 agencies improve core infrastructure, facilities, deploy renewable resources, and trim emissions, often accomplished through guaranteed savings. Your mission is to make the country a better, safer place. Our mission is to help you meet your energy goals and mandates. For more information, visit buildingsolutions.honeywell.com.
So, did we win that government contract?
We did.
And?
And now we've got to deal with the regulatory hurdles.
Well, good luck with that.
When the government's your client, you need to play by their rules.
Ah, and the rules change more than you'd think.
Exactly. We need someone who's done this before. Plus, it's complicated, so we're going with BDO.
BDO.
People who know government contracting know BDO. AFCEA has been bringing government and industry together since 1946. By joining AFCEA, you will reach the decision makers and become part of the discussion. You'll increase market visibility, gain market insight, receive discounts on AFCEA member services and events, and manage and engage corporate associates. AFCEA is the association of choice. Join today at www.afcea.org.
Debra Scheider, who has the biggest impact when it comes to making a source selection?
Jim, the RFP outlines the criteria for the award. and it depends on the level of importance of each of the elements. Cost always must be considered as is past performance. Depending on the criteria, technical may be more important, in which case the technical weighting would carry more weight through the evaluation process. In that case, the technical would have more of a say in the award decision because it carries more weight as outlined in the RFP. Price is always important, and what we've often found recently is we get many good and acceptable technical proposals, so the cost or price overall becomes more important.
Okay. So the question that industry would ask is, do the program people have sway, or do the contracting or accounting people have sway? In other words, is it possible that the program people want contractor X, but the contracts folks come in and say, because of money or whatever, we're not going to do that, we have to do Y? Is that a scenario that we ever experienced?
Well, again, it depends on the requirement. The budget situation should never sway, who you select. But up front, you need to say which is more important.
Yeah.
But as Deb mentioned earlier, that in some cases, when you really have a very competitive market and they're coming in with really great solutions, it may just come down to price.
Down to price, yeah. Well, I was trying to get at something slightly different. I understand that the evaluation criteria can be different and they weight technical more heavily, or management, or whatever. But I'm saying, given all of that, when it comes to sitting around the table and discussing an award decision or a pending award decision, do the contracts people tend to see what the technical folks are saying, or is it the other way around, or is it all over the board? I mean, that's my question. What do you think?
Ideally, we're working as a team. The contracting officer has a responsibility on behalf of the system to preserve the integrity of the process and make sure that we're adhering to our source selection plan, that we're following what we told industry we were going to do in the evaluation. But as far as sway is concerned, ideally the best source selections work when the entire team comes together and works cohesively. When we have a situation where one player becomes more dominant, it tends to prevent us from doing what we set out to do, which was to make the trade-offs necessary for the best value decision.
Okay. The SSEB, do they rank? Do they weight? Do they score? Do they recommend? Do they select?
Each volume of the proposal is evaluated independently, and the role of the SEB is to integrate the various recommendations of the team. So the technical team will bring their recommendation forward, management, costs, past performance, etc. It's the role of the SEB to integrate those recommendations and come to a consensus to recommend to the SSA whether to proceed to award or to enter discussions.
I see. So the deliverable, if you will, the outcome of that evaluation is that the SEB presents a recommendation to the selection authority, or
correct. They can rank, but it's not required.
But they do have a recommendation.
Correct.
So then the question I would ask, and the industry would ask, is does the source selection authority, is he or she bound by the recommendations of the board? And if not, what considerations are used then?
So the SSA isn't bound. SSA makes an independent decision on which offer to select, but the important thing is to document that decision. And often there's a lot of discussion that goes on about the evaluation, about a particular weakness or strength, and then the SSA makes a decision whether or not they think there was a strength and how significant that strength was.
But the selection authority, is he or she allowed to solicit inputs from anywhere and to make decisions based on criteria that are not necessarily obvious in the proposal, in the RFP? Is that okay? No.
No.
The answer is no. Okay.
No.
Then I guess I would ask the next question is, let's talk a little bit about what goes on behind the closed doors. When the board meets as a whole, do we find that there is discussion? Does it ever lead to heated debate? Does one or more parties tend to dominate the discussion? What actually goes on? Is there negotiations and trade-offs, or is it simply just real smooth and nothing ever goes wrong, Jim? What do you think?
A role of the SEB team lead is to really manage that team. It's really, and one of the things we do at NASA is really look to select someone we think have good leadership qualities to lead that team. Because yes, you've got people who have been evaluating for, say, 2-3 weeks, and sometimes there it gets a little tension. But the key is to get people back to evaluate against the criteria. And again, the main thing is you're looking for consensus on the evaluation score,
Okay,
and
so
not just from one person.
a consensus. So
Yes.
you try to drive to consensus.
That's what we do.
Is it possible to have a majority opinion and a minority opinion or a dissenting opinion?
Yes.
Yes, that is also possible. So here's a question for you. How often does the proverbial midnight call from the White House or from the senator occur, and does it impact the decision making if he or she calls the selection authority and says, I want you to pick company X? What happens?
The reality is that hardly ever happens. The integrity of the process is important to all players in the system, and fortunately most of the leadership team is aware of that. They receive briefings on how the process is going to go, and to their credit, most adhere scrupulously to it.
Okay, well, we're also going to step away right now for another commercial, but when we come back, I'd like to address how do contractors maximize their chances of winning? What's the board looking for?
In this hyper-competitive marketplace, as a federal government contractor, now more than ever, you need to identify, track, forecast, and analyze opportunities that will help you grow your company by better positioning yourself to win contracts. I'm Jamie Bratton, the founder of Easy GovOps, and that's our mission. Utilizing the most intuitive market intelligence platform, Easy GovOps, enables contractors of all sizes to manage their pipeline, collaborate, and team like never before. Experience for yourself the power available to you and your team with a 5-day free trial period with no commitment necessary to begin. Simply visit easygovops.com to start your free trial today. Join the hundreds of other federal government contractors who are enjoying the ultimate competitive advantage of our unequaled market intelligence. Just spend one free week at easygovops.com and see for yourself.
Questions. Do you lack win strategy, themes, and discriminators? Are you being outmaneuvered by your competition? Did you get a late start on your proposal? If you answered yes to one or more of these nightmare scenarios, we can help. Hi, I'm Jim McCarthy, owner of Key Solutions. We help government contractors win government contracts. And for over 30 years, KSI has helped clients win or retain over $130 billion in government contracts by providing the keys to winning. We assist companies both large and small to enter the U.S. government contracts market or to increase their market shares. We have worked with 87 of the top 100 government contractors and literally hundreds of small businesses. So if you're chasing a must-win contract opportunity, go to our website, aockeysolutions.com, and click on Win. It's a tough market out there. Don't go it alone. Welcome back. Mitch Rose from NOAA. A question I want to ask you is about compliance. How important is RFP compliance in the award decision?
Compliance is important, but it's a necessary but not sufficient element of the response to the source selection process. You've got to go beyond compliance and explain how will the job be managed, how will the job be performed, what is the relevance of the prior experience, what's the quality of past performance, and finally, what is the price being offered, and is it competitive? So compliance is a going-in position.
Is the lack of compliance a fatal flaw?
It is not necessarily a fatal flaw. Again, it's dependent on the type of solicitation that we have and the type of requirement. We can move into evaluations and identify deficiencies, weaknesses, significant deficiencies, and address that during the negotiation discussions with offerors phase if we get to that phase.
If you get to that phase.
If we make award on initial offers, which we often like to do because there's the press of time, the message is make your best effort going in.
Okay. Here's another concern that contractors have, and maybe you can address it. It's amazing to them is that in a page-limited proposal, let's say it's 50 pages long, and the statement of work itself in the RFP is 30 pages long, and the requirements say, be sure you address all the requirements of the statement of work. And so the question is, how do you get 5 pounds into that little bag how does that work? Why is that language still present in RFPs? How do you get a 50-page statement of work into a 30-page limited proposal? Any thoughts?
Well, first of all, Jim, I don't believe you should be putting out an RFP that says address every element of the statement of work. What you need to do is find the true discriminators of the outcome you're looking for, and how you want to really evaluate the offers to those discriminators that they're going to propose to, but not every element of a statement of work.
Okay, so basically you address the statement of work sort of in a holistic approach, but not necessarily have to get down to every fourth element of a WBS.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay, well here's a question we would ask. Let's talk about how do we legitimately evaluate or maximize evaluation points. In other words, what is the source evaluation board or source selection board looking for? What do they resonate? Do you all care whether or not there's graphics? Do you read the graphics and skip the text? Read the text and skip the graphics? How does that, can you talk to us about that?
We absolutely read the text, so please don't skip it. You really have to focus on Section M in the RFP, which are the discriminators as Bill outlined for award. That's where you really need to focus on those differentiators. But across the board, you really need to demonstrate the points that you're making. The team is really looking for evidence, not just you saying that you have a good solution.
Do hot boxes, that's what we call them, do they make any difference to you all? You see this little hot box that's got a nice little theme in it, and what, does it matter?
There's an entire industry that has grown up in the last 40 years or so on proposal technology and proposal making. And science studies have shown that the eye is drawn to a graphic before it's drawn to a text. So there is some credibility to that notion of how you craft the proposal. But really the most important point is to have a differentiating story on what your offer is that is clear and compelling. And the rest of it is peripheral to that central message.
Well, okay. Well, here's another question, and I hope I'm not down in the weeds too much, but when the government receives a proposal, does it tend to split up sections among different evaluators and say, evaluator A, you're doing this, you read this, B, you read this, or does everybody get the entire package?
The teams are broken up and evaluate different sections. So there's a technical team, a management team, cost team, et cetera. They focus on their section. They thoroughly evaluate individually each section, then come together for consensus on that proposal. The proposal overall is evaluated through consensus, and then you start the next proposal.
So at NASA, the SEB, who are the voting members, will read the entire proposal that relates to the area they're going to score. Now then they'll call upon some functional expertise to hit certain areas that we use. They call advisors to the voting members.
Okay, well, and that's fascinating. We're going to break for another commercial, and when we come back, what I'd like to do is ask each of you a question of one piece of advice that you would give industry or government to improve the process. We'll break now. Thanks.
Working in contract management is a complex job. Creating, executing, managing contracts. It's an ever-changing world, and our members share the same challenges. At the National Contract Management Association, we know this business, gathering the best minds in our field, furthering your career by providing knowledge and training. Together, we've figured it out.
Since 1941, the USO has been lifting the spirits of America's troops and their families. Members of our military continue to make sacrifices and defend our nation. That's why the USO of Metropolitan Washington, Baltimore is committed to serving them throughout their years of service. USO Metro is the way for you to say thanks to our local military members, their families, and our wounded warriors and caregivers. Please visit us at usometro.org.
As you've seen from watching our show, we've begun to produce and air commercials. And the response from prospective advertisers has been very strong for a couple of really smart reasons. First off, advertising in Government Contracting Weekly has virtually no waste. Our audience is made up almost exclusively of contracting executives and procurement officers. If that's your target market, we've got you covered. Secondly, we include commercial production within the reasonable cost of an advertising schedule. And even better, in producing your commercial, we utilize the 30-plus years of experience of Key Solutions, who've helped their clients win over $130 billion in contracts, in part by scoping out and refining the most impactful message. If you'd like to learn more, Contact us at governmentcontractingweekly.com and click on Advertise.
Welcome back. One piece of advice on a recommendation to improve the process, and then who's that advice given to? Mitch, start.
My message to industry is craft a team that allows you the best chance to differentiate your offer from all others.
Okay. Debra Scheider, what's your suggestion?
Jim, my suggestion is the government and industry to communicate openly up until final RFP release to enhance understanding of the requirement and feedback on the proposed approach.
Okay. Bill?
My recommendation to the government is clearly define the outcomes you want and just use the discriminators to evaluate the companies that can meet that outcome.
All right. Well, listen, thank you very much for being here today. This subject is so rich, we could spend episodes after episodes on it. But in any case, as noted at the top of our show, few groups have more impact on a government contractor's future than their source evaluation board. I hope that this morning's discussion helped to provide a better understanding of the dynamics of this critical part of the procurement process. I want to thank Mitchell Ross, Director of the Acquisition and Grants Office for NOAA. Mitchell, thank you for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Debra Scheider, the Director of the Office of Contracts for NRO.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much. And of course, Bill McNally, the Assistant Administrator for Procurement and the Deputy Chief Acquisition Officer for NASA. I'd also like to offer a special thank you to NCMA, the National Contract Management Association, for making these three outstanding members of the NCMA Board of Advisors and Board of Directors available to us this morning. But most importantly, I want to thank you, our viewers, for once again making Government Contracting Weekly a regular part of your learning regimen. Now, on behalf of all my colleagues at Key Solutions, I'm Jim McCarthy, and I'll see you next week.
You've been watching Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored each week by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. For additional information, comments, questions, or suggestions, please write us at governmentcontractingweekly.com.